Hello, everybody. Some exciting behind the scenes technical troubleshooting. We got everyone on the screen. We're good to go. Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Roberts. I lead the AI and AX initiatives on the Netlify side, and I'll let this fabulous group of folks introduce themselves. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I'm Mark Dorsey. I'm the CISO at Netlify. Super pumped to be here today. It's fantastic. I'll go ahead and maybe pop to Bobby.
Yeah, very excited to be here. I'm Bobby Destimoni. I'm the founder of Pomerium, which is an open source identity-aware access proxy, and excited to talk about all things agentic today with.
Very cool. And I guess I'll close it out. G'day, everyone. I'm Tobin. I run a research lab at Stanford on agent security and lead agents and MCP at WorkOS, which is a security and auth vendor that sells to literally all of the AI labs except Google DeepMind.
Right on. Well, like I said, this is a fabulous group of folks. We're going to be diving today. Previously on the AX series, we've talked about some practical examples of the principles of AX and how to build it out and working with it. And today we're going to try to dive a little bit deeper on the kind of security aspects of it. And so I think like maybe just to kick this off, right? So there's actually a lot of different kind of security angles to be concerned about. It's not just us as people building a good AX, we have to worry about it. But as our teams, as our relatives, even like anyone like trying to be a consumer of agents, right? There's that layer by itself, which is a whole mess itself. So I'd like to kick this off by like talking about, what are the kind of, agent considerations as an AI user or consumer? Like what security questions should people be thinking about in this new world? Not, there's always this baseline, but like, what's the new stuff that they need to be thinking about now? And I'll kick that over to Bobby to kick us off.
Yeah, that's such a big one.
Yeah.
So it's hard to narrow it down. But I would just maybe to narrow it down, think about where I've been spending a lot of time thinking about and working on, which is where these agents are the same as things we've used in the past and where they're different. And I think there are a lot of principles we can bring from previous previous security methodologies and how we think about securing workloads both as users and as builders. And then I think it's really key, and it's really early here, and it's probably what we'll talk about, and how these agents are fundamentally different, and how there's not really good corollaries in whether it's machine access or human access. And I think that's where the next, it's happened so fast, but the next couple of years and few years will be most interesting, is where we learn how these workloads are fundamentally different and how to interact with these tools.
Yeah. And just to clarify, like, are you thinking that like right now, because of the state of the world of things and the way we kind of build for agents, they're reusing things that basically look like the human that they're logging in with, and so that disambiguity doesn't really exist really well today, and that means like how do you apply rules and policies to one and not the other?
100%. I think this is where, like, in my opinion, where we are right now in the life cycle of understanding these tools. A lot of these, LLMs are empowered with actual human credentials, human capabilities, and obviously, LLMs. The most obvious thing is can work much faster than a human can, and so I think in the past we've been okay with like what I would call like session-based authentication and authorization, because the scope of what can happen is somewhat limited to how long they're like logged into their browser, and that's held up okay. I think with agent or LLM, where one request to the next can be the difference between a hallucination or not, it's a much to have that level of empowerment, but that level of non-determinism from one request to the next is pretty extreme. So I think that's like, for me, the most obvious way it's different.
Yeah, 100%. I think just to back up a little bit here, I think it's also worth kind of maybe scoping a few things around what we think about as, a consumer of agents, right? So obviously there's the people using ChatGPTs and just kind of, search and querying systems like that. And what data they give them, and what happens to that data afterwards. There's that whole problem. Then there's this kind of explosion of MCP servers, or model context protocol servers, where it's essentially you're given either an executable or a remote URL that you can say, agent, to answer these questions or to access this data, you can go here. I'm not going to give it to you directly. You can go here and do it on my behalf. And then there's this other world of protocols, which is like inter-agent communication. On the consumer side, that's largely we're not seeing that too much outside of the enterprise, frankly. But those are kind of the three big ones that at least I'm seeing right now. And to your point, Bobby, I think if I'm going to grab data and I throw it into a tool, there's audit logs that says, hey, Sean went and grabbed this data, and then if that data is exposed somewhere, we know probably that it was the person who accessed it. And then if I say, hey, MCP, you can use this MCP to go and get this data for me, but it looks just like me. Now where does things happen? And I'm curious, Mark, I'm going to throw it over to you. Of these three things, or just this one specifically, where's your thoughts on, like, as consumers or as employees of a business, like, what should they be doing, like, in this new world?
I think from a security practitioner perspective, it normally comes down to what type of data and what class of data it is, and whether or not it's okay to throw that thing in, despite of who you are and who's pretending to be you. I like to think of these things as sort of like your new best friend that is constantly hallucinating, and they're running around with a bunch of scissors, aka like Tally from South Park or something to that effect, in order to put a picture in somebody's mind. Like there they are running around, taking actions on your behalf. And you want to be really careful with who you grant license to do things on your behalf. And that's what we're seeing today, is that these agents can be really powerful and they can help you do lots of different things. At the same time, there's like all the little disclaimers down at the bottom, right? It can get things wrong, right? It could, so be sure in the thing that you're asking for. Otherwise, it just might, sort of destroy the database that you hold near and dear to your heart, as we've heard in some cases as of late. So I spend lots of time coding using agents and those sorts of things. And I can't tell you the number of times where I'm like, gosh, we just spoke about this, right? I feel like I'm speaking to my best friend, and they've completely forgotten all of the context within seconds. And so you're looking for different ways and patterns to be able to remind them of what you were discussing. So when it comes down to the type of data that you're injecting or attempting to inject into a system, and you want it to do the right thing, it takes a lot of care and feeding. And the trust moment just isn't quite there yet. So I like to think of things in terms of trust but verify. And so I find myself spending the vast majority of my time in the verify land. So and it continues, as I use it more and more, my moment of trust becomes less and less. And so now I started out somewhere near 50-50. Now I'm down to 10-90.
Right, we'll see how low that can go.
Yeah,
exactly.
So
To
yeah,
play off that, I really like that point, Mark. And I feel like we've had the ability. Everyone was worried when chatbots came out about sending data into chatbots. That was like the big security risk. It's like, oh, is our data going to OpenAI? Kind of, we've digested that risk. And then there was a worry, we had tool calling, this ability of language models to perform some constrained action that you specify. And there was worries around that. How do we make that safe? And in general, we dealt with that because it's a constrained set of things you can do. It's in the context of someone building an AI app. They can evaluate it. They can make sure it's doing what it intended. The real change with MCP is now you have just a ton of random tools that folks can add in that are external services that were never exposed before to language models. And you're right, they can just kind of do whatever they feel like if you give them access. And that is terrifying. That leads to an 80-20 terrifying concern.
Yeah, 100%. I think, and to the question in the chat, it's like, should we have started with 50-50 trust? And I think that's fair. I think really it's like there's a neutral, like, let's give this thing a try and let it prove its worth. And I think I think where we're at right now is like there's so much bottled up potential, and the marketing around it is only focused on the potential and not the gap that we have to close to capture
Mhm.
that potential. And therefore, I don't know if the trust is as much as like they can't do the things that they were made to do, as much as they can't live up to the hype that they were said that they were going to do. You know, I don't have to do anything now. I just like automate my job away now, and it's all done. And turns out that it's not that cut and dry. On the like one of the things like I'm a developer, and one of the things that I see and that scares me a lot is, I think Bobby, you mentioned like they can do a lot of agents can just do a lot of work on your behalf, and I'm talking about coding agents in this context. Where as a human, I'm not just going to be able to rewrite the app in 3 minutes. Just not going to happen unless I just delete it. I can do that in 3 minutes, but like it will make complex decisions, or rather, it will make changes that are complex decisions for us to work through on a whim. And then there's other things that it does where it will confidently do the wrong thing, such as like importing dependencies that don't exist, which introduces this kind of new, it's not really new, but like now more viable attack vector. I forget the name of it, but it's like squatting or something, like a dependency squatting or something. So essentially, you can imagine that I asked my agent to code something up. It says, "Yeah, you're going to need this dependency from this registry, and I'm going to install it for you." And that dependency did not exist at all. And then someone realized that a model kept producing this made up dependency. They created it, injected malware, and did just enough to satisfy the dependency, requirements. And now agents are just confidently installing malware. And as a developer, right, that is a very hard problem, because it's always been a hard problem to manage your dependencies, especially at the depth of dependencies that the world we're kind of in now. But that's the thing that scares me the most. Like, where is the like, do we have any practical advice on like how to help protecting against like that specific problem, so I can sleep better at night while my agent is coding away? Is that have any of y'all kind of run to that? Like, I think the socket.dev, yeah, talking with their team, they seem to be doing a lot of this kind of, let's see if we can help find these dependencies ahead of time. So like I know that there's at least some kind of capabilities that exist in the wild today that might be really interesting for us to like examine more and kind of bring into the workflows that we have. Whereas before, I wouldn't say that they were like extras, but like that was definitely a very well managed and mature org. You're seeing having these dependency scanning and making sure that everything was really well done. Many orgs weren't doing or aren't doing that. But now again, they can so confidently do things that they couldn't do before. It's becoming more and more of a requirement that you have to have these if you want to enable your team to do these things in a safe manner. So yeah, so
I would say that there's been tool sets for years that will go out and say whether or not you're using the appropriate license. And I think that those things have,
right.
They've existed, but there was never the question as to whether or not it needed to have existed at all in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And it really comes back to that, which is you go through and you're looking at the tools like, oh, all of our licensing is great. But at no
Yeah.
point in time did somebody go through and really take a look and say, yes, all the licensing, that's fabulous. But does this thing need to exist in the first place? Are we
Mm-hmm.
actually leveraging a set of tools that's either sanctioned by the company, if you wanted to go that far, or known to be of use to the actual application, right? So are there dependencies that don't even need to exist at all? Or we've created, because the thing can do it so quickly, as you mentioned, like it created a very complex object that could have been far simpler if we had,
Yeah.
done it ourselves, right? And so I think that the complexity of the mechanism and what's available to it from a knowledge source and what it's drawing from allows for this sort of ambiguous inclusion of libraries and modules where you're just not really sure whether or not the things needed to exist in the first place. For example, like creating a database schema or trying to link up your application to a database and all that other sort of stuff. Boy, it will try every single method, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it needed to ever have included a particular library, which is actually in the way. Not that I've experienced this myself, but yeah.
At this point, I feel like we all have.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
I was
that's just sort of
writing
this
unit
data
tests.
thing, right? Enumerating versus actually validating the need for existence.
Yeah.
I was writing unit tests yesterday, and the number of hallucinations per minute of getting a try was off the charts. I have an answer to this, and I don't particularly like the answer, but it does feel like the status quo, which is just as if you have a mediocre intern as your engineer, they don't get to their final code does not go to production. Every time I create a new PR, 6 different AI bots join the thread and are all over the code. And I think, and I don't necessarily think this is the best solution, but the current tooling that people are using is you vibe code your app, and then a responsible engineer has a bunch of other AIs look over what's been written and hope that one of them spots whatever horrific security flaw you introduced. And again, I don't think this is like the dream solution, but it does feel close to status quo at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. There has to be something validating. I don't know. I think I think we'll definitely see a suite of tools like I mentioned. Soccer.dev I think is a really good one, as one that looks at the current registry available, and then it's not only does this module exist and does it do what it says it does, but like what else is it doing that it's not marketing to you and scanning for those things, which I don't know how well my confidence on AI finding those things is like being hit. But I think I'd like to throw it over to you, Bobby, because like as I'm aware, Primarium is really kind of building a suite of tools to help enterprises kind of safely also run MCPs and like kind of manage, some sort of safety boundaries around this new world. Like, describe what you're seeing and how you're providing safety to the team.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I mean, I'll just add to the overconfidence is like, just to agree with that. I think that's something we've all felt using these tools, which is it's like confidently incorrect. You'll hear a lot. And to steal something my wife said to me once, which is often wrong, never in doubt, about her profession as a surgeon, which makes me a little nervous about getting surgery. But these tools I really characterize that in my opinion. To talk a little bit about like Pomerium, and so Pomerium is like classically on the human side examines every single request and enforces authorization there. And so this is even more important with the new kind of threat modeling around kind of agents and models we've talked about here. I think so. We're trying to do that and verify the entire, you talked about MCP servers and things like that, the entire request chain. For that type of behavior. But a lot of this is really subtle. And so like we're talking about these agents hallucinating, an SDK call or something like that. Something like Pomerium or some guardrail could detect it. I think the challenge is, and as Tobin was talking about, you're kind of hoping another AI tool detects it in your PR or something like that. And I think we're just like really early here too. As attacks get more sophisticated, you can start looking at maybe all our agents have been poisoned. Their training data has been poisoned on something like a really sophisticated attacker. I don't like, I haven't seen that like widespread yet, but I think this is the part about being so early. I'm sure attacks like this will come about. So I think it's incredibly important to have control mechanisms as early as possible in how we're enabling these agents and LLMs to work, in part for that reason. And I think it's going to be a whole stack that evolves around getting the promise of these tools, but also making sure that we can reorient from 10 to 90 trust the other way around. But I think it's going to take time and experience here.
100%. So let's shift this conversation a little bit. So we've been talking about as a consumer, let's say an employee, using AI and agents, and how should they think about the security and what we should do to help them. But I want to shift it over now to, if like as providers of services, right? We want to build a great agent experience so that agents working with our service are able to achieve the goals that they were kind of delegated to do, right? So our end goal is to serve our end customers, and those customers are now turning to agents to delegate more and more. And as we talked about, I think that this is going to, maybe the theme of this is, right. There are things that agents can do now because of their confidence or their just ability to just like spit out code, right, as fast as you want to pay for that token machine. They can do things that humans were far and above less likely to have ever done, right? And when we also combine it with the state of the world of like, what tools do you have to assign to attribute an agent doing something versus a human? How should we think about building a good agent experience such that we handle these issues? And to kick this off with an anecdote, and I hope Matt loves every time I bring this up. But Matt, our CEO, he once brought down our production site, our landing site, because he was just kind of working with an agent, coding a different site entirely, and then he asked the agent to deploy, and agents arbitrarily will pick things to remember and put into their memory. And despite working on a completely different directory, a completely different project entirely, when it told it to deploy, it was very confident that the site ID, the thing that it needed to deploy to, was the wrong site. So it deployed to the wrong site, in which broke our production site. And obviously that could have always happened, right? Like anyone could go and mess that up pretty bad. But the reality is that would be extremely unlikely given all the other guardrails that we have. And it has been. I can't name a time that's ever happened, at least internally. And we've been doing this for a decade. So that is a new problem space. As we think about how agents can work with us, we need to think about guardrails at Netlify in terms of like, are you sure you're trying, like this project has only ever been deployed through a GitHub webhook, that Git flow. You're trying to manually deploy something. This is totally out of bounds. Are you sure you want to do this? And like putting friction in place to make sure and double confirm with a human that this is a good action to take. And so that's just one anecdote and how we're thinking about changing our agent experience. But I'm curious, I'll throw it over to you, Tobin. How should people building an agent experience think about this problem? Not this one specifically, but this whole new problem space.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many elements of security in here that are needed to make this not bad. The one that comes top of mind, especially in the story you just gave, is agent identity questions and access control questions. So Linear is connected to Slack, which is connected to the Cursor background agent, which is connected to GitHub, where I can, for a given Linear ticket, have it spin up a PR, pretend to be me, and put that on the repo. And that is terrifying for a bunch of reasons. Firstly, I hope that my code is better than whatever it is producing, and I'm embarrassed a little bit. But Linear has a lot of different tickets on it, and there are many repos that I do not want it to touch. And controlling that and making sure it performs the correct operations on the correct tools in a more general sense when you have MCPs connected is really hard to do in vibes, right? It was really hard for Matt when he was deploying the site to make sure the model kind of knew the right thing. That's you can do context engineering, but it's very hard to do. It's actually
you don't know in that scenario, he wouldn't have known it was picking some random piece of memory until after it did it. It didn't confirm. And even if it did, if it said, hey, do you want to deploy this site ID? And it's just like, it's just an opaque ID. So it's like, I have no idea. Sure. It's like, 100%. And he wouldn't have known until after the action.
I don't even look at those things. I have the coding agent say yes to most commands anyway. I
There you
run
go.
things.
And that's our
Yeah,
security talk, everybody. Have a good.
but yeah,
Be kicked off
I think
stage.
that this
But
really
it's
does expose like the
restricting access.
fundamentals.
Mark, go. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is like it sort of shows the underbelly, or the soft underbelly of the security controls that we do feel like we have in place, and those security controls can come quickly into question when the thing on the other side has generated thousands of lines of code, or even one that looks close to what it needed to be. Right? You think about all the classic sort of security attacks from domain names that look like they should look like a particular thing, but is really actually a redirect that can exist with a particular font. So all the way through, right? And so it really does expose that this is sort of what the security community has been talking about for many, many years, and the controls that we do try and put in place, right? Which is we try and put in enough friction so that the business can operate with whatever risk tolerance that it can stomach, right? So you need to be in the business of doing business, right? And so we try and get down to business. And in order to do so, we have to accept some amount of risk. The issue that we're seeing today is a lot of those controls that we have in place and have had in place for many years are lacking, not necessarily because we didn't know about it, but they're lacking in this new context where you do have a partner who is there generating thousands of lines of code and may not be doing so in what we consider to be a safe way. And so the world, to Tobin's point, does need to pivot a bit around these tools so that we actually do have comprehensive controls in place, regardless if it's a human typing really fast, a bot typing really fast, right? It's all about that throughput moment, right? And so it can do things with this throughput that at scale. I mean, even if you were a senior, developer, you're there, your staff, whatever it might be, principal, and you're reviewing some code that's getting committed. How long would it take you to actually review, 10,000 lines of code that were written overnight by a set of agents, right? And so it does become what I like to consider to be the clone wars, which is we have lots of clones, and those clones are generating things at rapid rates of speed as far as the security community is concerned. And we need our own clones, back to the unit testing example from before, in order to try and help us do the right thing as it goes forward. Otherwise, we are literally outmanned, outgunned by all of the things, right? So this is where we are, not only from this thing, which is from a errors and emissions perspective, but from an attack surface perspective. So we're seeing this everywhere, right? Low
100%.
cost. It's very low cost to do all of the wrong things, regardless if you're being malicious or otherwise.
Yeah, I think going back to something you said, I think is an important eye opener, is that there's no reward for being the most secure thing ever, and that would mean no one can do anything ever without, you would be locked down. So there is some level of risk that you have to take. Nothing is riskless, and previously, though, I think that this is the core of this problem, is that like we have the capacity and capabilities to add friction or add the right checks and balances into the user experience, the developer experience, and the agent experience. The capabilities of doing that exist, but historically, the risk profile has not been such that it triggered product prioritization, right? And so now I think the question is, okay, the things that we assumed were low risk before, we should be going back and auditing the likelihood of that happening in this new world. And if it happens, like, how are we going to try to prevent it, right? And then if it happens, how do we know what triggered that thing, right? For example, if with Netlify being able to say, hey, you are about to deploy in a way that you've never done before. Are you sure you want to do that? We can now also, at very least, audit that they had a double sign-off. They double confirmed that. And we also know that it came from this agentic flow. So while some things might be ambiguous to us, for example, maybe the model specifically or whatever, we do know a human was in the loop and they confirmed it. And now we'll have to talk about whether or not computer use agents confirmed it for them. so Clone Wars. Bobby, what are you thinking about in this space?
Well, there's a lot there. I mean, I agree that like this ultimately comes down to risk tolerance and like how we're thinking about the risk. But something I'm sure you guys are all feeling is, and I've never seen this before in my career, the pressure to get the productivity gains, perceived
Right.
or
Perceived.
real from using these tools is so high. I've seen people do things that in no other situation would I see security teams bless, because straight down from the board, there it feels like an existential risk not to be AI native and develop with these tools and to be shipping as fast as possible. And maybe I have an anecdote about like what I've seen over and over again. But I do want to talk about human in the loop, because I think this is like maybe one of my hot takes here, which is like, this seems to be the de facto standard in which we fall back on, because the controls are so coarse grained. And to me, human in the loop is a little bit of a recast of a very old principle, which is like the two-man principle or the four eyes principle, which has classically been reserved for like the most like nation state life critical security systems, where you really need two people at the keyboard to prevent the type of leaks that say like Snowden did, or like it's very expensive, especially with two humans. And I guess it's less expensive when there's only one human. But I do think human in the loop is a huge smell of where we are in terms of security and going back to trust. And so I'm curious what like other folks, think about that. But I think we'll know that we're advancing, in my point of view, as we're able to slowly remove the human in the loop guardrails we have, which probably feels scary, but I think that's to me the number one indicator we're making progress in this field.
Yeah, I think it does go back to sort of the entire pipeline as something goes out, and the ability for folks to plug in the right amount for them of friction when trying to deliver something to a production environment. And so, for example, like we have branch protection enforced on all of our repos, which means, somebody else is going to have to review it. It's a very standard control at this point. I would say that as time goes forward, the humans will not be able to perform all of the reviews, and rather we'll be the ones to set up the appropriate amount of risk that we're willing to accept as a business, so that we can move at speed, as fast as or faster than the competition, depending on which segment of the market that we're in, where we may be risk averse, or our risk appetite has to be a little bit better, so that we can catch up or do the right things. So I would say that like in time, the humans will be more about with programmatic design, but it will be more the combination of tools that allow you to accept the right amount of risk for your business. And the second thing that reviews the code, or the second through the nth thing that reviews, so that we do get the proper quality gate in place, will need to be configurable, right? And we'll need to have that by design, so that we can say, oh no, it's been through 47 checks of quality. This is what it looks like. I think today we have some unit testing that goes on for most places, and we have a second pair of eyes that jumps in. But for the most part, it can be very difficult. So what do I find myself doing? Lots of snapshotting, lots of committing, and giving myself the ability to roll back as just sort of a safeguard control. And that can be very difficult depending on where you are and what project you're working on, and how fast can you roll back? Where are you deployed? Those sort of things, right? So the combination of controls still comes into play, right? And then who is allowed to make that final commit, right? What type of controls do you have in place there?
Yeah, 100%. I think that there's also this, when we talk about this, I feel like it's heard as there's a one size fits all approach to this, but the reality is some areas of your code or system have different blast radiuses of issue, right? To Bobby's point, not everything, in the Pentagon is double keyed. It's like there's some things that have to be, right? And that is a risk tolerance question. That it's all it is. And as we think about, how we might be able to then automate some of the reviews and the checking for security vulnerabilities and things like that, I think the other thing is that we have to be willing someone's going to have to be willing for these things to be wrong enough for us to then get it right. Meaning there will be security, there will be bugs that get through, there will be issues that get through these checks. However, we also know the means for which we can coach it to fix that in the future, right? Just like, to Tobin's point earlier, if this is a new hire or someone who is not familiar with your code base, or rather your ways of doing things, or your threshold for, let's say, privacy or security controls, right? They need to be taught this, and they're going to do things wrong. They're going to put PII in a URL or something, right? Like, and then you just, okay, don't do that again because of these reasons. And then going forward, that should not happen anymore. But that's also going to have to be like, we're going to have to take some level of leap of faith on these things. And maybe we do it in a way that's like, we still do the human review process while we do the automated process at the same time, and just check notes. And then over time, we should start to build that trust up. I think that that's probably the path forward in the automation side. But I also agree with you, Bobby. If we're like, nope, agents aren't good enough, we need a human in there, we're also assuming that a human is infallible, right? Like, which is a bad, has historically not been true. So like, and then you say, okay, a human has to review this 1,000 file, whatever PR in every detail. They're not going to, right? Or rather to the extent that it needs to be. And then we have to fall back to other practices. To your point, Mark, let's just tie everyone's thoughts together, is that small incremental changes are much easier to review, easier to understand, safer to roll back and just facilitate an audit. So it seems like we're coming back to this, like, the same old practices, but better, and in a way that fits this new world. Tobin, I see your
Mark unmuted. I want to give you a chance to respond to that, and then I want to talk about how AX interacts with this. But go, Mark.
Yeah, no, I think that I was going to underscore there just a little bit around, what's old is new. And we've talked about these practices for many, many years, right? And it goes all the way back to, your CS 101 class, where you've commented out every single line of code but one. And you're like, why is this thing not working properly? The issue is that today, like I mentioned earlier, it's thousands of lines of code. And the incremental change that you see is so incremental and so small. Our inability to have the proper visibility around this stuff today is really where we're at. We don't understand the size of the change when it's been committed. Yes, it displays on the screen. You're looking at all the lines. You can review each one of them. Question is whether or not you will. So best practice comes back in here. The issue is that our best practices have only been at what I would consider to be human level throughput with a single throughput moment. Now it is at the ingress side of the funnel for commit is so large that our controls are breaking down because they were largely manual in the first place. And the quality moment is very tough to attain if that's the case.
Yeah, totally second. Also, almost zooming out a little bit, I mean, this series is called the Agent Experience series. And I think kind of the flip side of that being the user experience, we really haven't solved what that human in the loop review, two-party approval experience looks like. We had a session at Stanford, and there was someone from OpenAI there, and everyone's talking about keeping the human in the loop, human approval for things. And they made a great comment, which is that consumers don't care. Like, stepping back from the developer experience, people are lazy. Like, there's a reason I have Claude auto run, because that isn't a revealed preference that people have. And the way you get around that is you do least privilege on the actions of agents. You make sure they can't do anything unexpected, but then they need to be able to escalate their approach, right? They need to be able to request that. And how do you have that work without a human constantly being frustrated, just clicking accept, oh, this annoying agent suddenly wants my social security number, accept. And putting aside the kind of development questions, I think there is like a deep user experience challenge here that no one's really solved yet to make it really nice to do these human approvals and escalations of privilege.
Yeah.
I think we need to have a simple, in the world, I've generated this before with my teams, and I've generated a flow chart, which is, if your answer is an "Are you sure" button, go to step one. So if you come up with "Are you sure?" Like just go all the way back to step one, because we've likely missed what the actual solve is for this particular thing. So you can do all sorts of things in the middle, and there's all sorts of solves. But that "Are you sure?" Like, can I make this commit? Sure. Can I make this commit? Sure. Right. But I don't understand the impact of what's happening. Right. And neither does the thing that's generating it, because it's largely modeled after what a human would do versus, okay, is this the quote unquote right thing to do? It reminds me of like generating images early on with OpenAI, and you're sitting there like, oh, please design something so it looks like it was done by Van Gogh. Right. Well, today we don't necessarily have a developer to go through and be like, oh, please design this after the way no one would want to do this, but after the way Mark Dorsey would code this. Like, that's just not a great place to start. Like, don't do this, because like, yeah, you don't code at all. No. But it's been since the 90s, Mark. But I would say, like, go back, and like the way that we've done this is that it pulls in knowledge, tries to do the best thing. And today it's pulling in knowledge from the actual spec. And I think in the future, right, of course, it will learn and it will be better. But right now we're still in this, I don't know. I think we're still like coming up on the tipping point, to reference that book. And, it feels like we're on the precipice of it, but it constantly feels like that to me. So we'll see when we get there. I'll let you know when the first full app goes out the door, flawless victory. Until then.
So now
we'll see.
I'm itching to reference this book now. If you haven't, there's this, there's a book called "If Hemingway Wrote JavaScript." So it's a great book. It's a book that shows if various different playwrights and wordsmiths wrote programs and what they might look like in their form. So now I want to go do that, and I'll add Mark Dorsey to the list. But I think to y'all's point, like, even in this conversation, we're assuming human in the loop. One, that it exists. Two, that they understand it. And then three, that they acknowledge it and understand what they're acknowledging. But like, as anyone over the last, I don't know, 8 years now or whatever has seen these cookie consent banners, and they're just like, boom, 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 boom. Just like, don't care. Like, that we're teaching a habit that will that undermines the goal of the habit, right? Like it's just not, it's not going to produce the result that we want with the human in the loop aspect. And so, but that becomes a challenge though. If we can't put something in place that we have conviction that will be used the right way, then what are the alternatives? Like, that's the problem to solve. I think Bobby threw that out there as the question to ask, right?
I don't have a good enough solution. I'm certainly not smart enough, but I'll echo the problem, which is we've all felt it, and what's old is new again. I think I first saw this, in undergrad. I think Ross Anderson, security engineering, talked about alert fatigue. And I forget the magic number here, but like you hit a certain amount of alerts or reprompts, and anyone who remembers, it's probably still a thing. I just haven't used Windows in a while. User account manager, when you get prompted for admin, like everyone just said yes. And then at a certain point, you just stopped reading it. And I forget like what the magic number is where you just start ignoring it and auto accept. And I'm like Tobin, I do auto accept and then review the PR before, because it's the only practical thing. I'd be really interested to see what the actual metrics are on like Cloud Code, for example, for people who do just that, because I think we've well surpassed whatever, a human can actually review and be productive, and not just, being a monkey at a keyboard. So I don't have a solution, but the problem is just very obvious. And then what's old is new here for me too.
Even the micro experience here, where it's like you use an MCP to do something, and then every tool call is like, do you want this tool call to run? And the intent is great. Yeah, I'm going to look into this. I'm going to understand what it does, and I'm going to say yes or no. And then the reality is everyone just says yes, or no. If it's unexpected, but generally speaking, especially for a tool that they trust. I mean, for me, this whole world of MCPs in terms of a security problem, obviously it's the clear executable problem of like, a lot of these MCP servers, you're just downloading software to run on your computer with unlimited privileges. But I also kind of equate it similar to the Chrome and browser extensions problem, where it's like you not only can you install these things that can see anything that you're doing, but they can be built in such a way that they add value now. They're sold to someone or someone else has inherited it, and then under the hood it changes. But you've already given all the permissions to do this indefinitely in the future. So just in general, the human in the loop confirmation, where we're using it as a unilateral, yes, this is okay to do going forward. But the reality is not only is it not going to be effective, but the more coarse grained you make it and the shorter lived, it becomes even less effective because people just ignore it anyway. So, I 100% agree with you, Bobby. I think I had in my mind going into this conversation that human in the loop has a lot of value, and I think it probably still does in the immediate term, with lack of alternatives. But we collectively have to get away from this because every agent, every MCP tool on that agent, we're all contributing to this collective alert fatigue, which we've absolutely already hit. I couldn't agree more. Like we've already hit it. We're past that. So how do we undo this and then go from here? So I think we're rounding out our time. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to mention in terms of like these security opportunities before we head out?
I think we do have a tremendous opportunity in front of us. Like, if you look back at the big things that we've done successfully as, I guess, a community over time, right? I think arguably maybe the AS400 is probably our greatest achievement. But I'm happy to debate that with some other folks, just from like its ability to still be relevant within the world and things that we've done really, really, really well. And I think we have an opportunity to do that right now, which is to rewrite the way that overall quality has shown up in the things that we're able to produce over time. And this is just showing our absolute need to focus in, double down on the overall quality moment that is these things generating, right? We've had forever, right? Folks have been reviewing code and still it goes out with bugs, right? And unintended side effects. And so we have a real moment right now when we are in the middle of the clone wars, or at least maybe we're starting them. But I really feel like we have this opportunity right here, right now, to probably fix decades worth of challenges that they've just always been there, but the throughput hasn't exacerbated them as it is today. So I look at it as more of an opportunity for the next set of builders to really go out and fix the things that we have sort of masked with process, right? Manual process in reality over time. But we have an opportunity in front of us.
Yeah, I guess, to add my last piece is a lot of what we've talked about today is the effects on external systems. These external systems, especially when you use something like MCP, also introduce things into your context window, and that introduces new risks. And tools like MCP are just creating new attack surfaces. And there's 1,000,001 people trying to solve them. I encourage everyone who's interested in the space to update everything, because things are patched day by day, and stay abreast of how things change and be part of this discussion as the technology evolves, because it will matter more and more to the day-to-day life, not only developers but just regular folks using chatbots.
I completely agree. And I think just a parting thought for me is actually, I'm going to steal from a commenter who said this further up and a few other times, but hopefully I'm saying your name right, Marcin. Marcin, we spend a lot of time giving AI context. What about AI giving us context? And I think therein lies one of the biggest unlocks in how we enforce security moving forward. And so I think that's where the biggest opportunity is, because there certainly is that context. Whether we're doing enough to leverage it and enforce based on it, I think there's a lot to be done here. And so this is where I'm most excited.
Yeah, 100%. So we covered a lot of ground today, from consumers to building AX, in securing AX on our side. I think we've covered that, especially internally. I mean, the most important things you should be doing is revisiting both your product, product roadmap in terms of what it decided in terms of risk assessment, and identify whether or not those things are still the right calls, or whether or not agents can kind of upend that risk profile. And then also on the development workflow side, right? So we assumed some amount of risks. Here's how we do software development at a given company. And now we have to start asking, as agents start writing more of the code or potentially accepting more PRs or whatever we're having them do, who's watching the Watchmen type of like who's making sure that that's okay, and and is that secondary system able to meet the scale and demand of the input system, right? Those are incredibly important. And then lastly, as we think about building our own agent experience, really questioning what we allow people to do on our services, but also, questioning whether or not the quote unquote status quo today of human in the loop or just auditing itself is enough to protect your end customers. I know. I think that there's also this line that we're like, well, it's good enough to protect ourselves, right, from accountability here. But the reality is like, to have a great agent experience, again, we're trying to make sure that the end user is able to safely achieve the goals that they want, regardless of whether or not they're delegating it to agents. And being not to blame in this isn't good enough. We have to actually make that achievable and doing the right things and putting the right friction in place to make that happen. So I appreciate Bobby, Tobin, and Mark for joining on this session. Everyone, we're going to be having 2 more sessions coming up. One is tomorrow. It's an AI Q&A around turning experiments into production wins, and we'll have the team show real projects, real fixes, and how we kind of go from prompt to live development. And then on August 20th, securing AI-powered pipelines. We have some of our team on the SE side talking about how to safely do model key management, data integrity, and compliance checks. So very relevant and practical application of some of the ideas we talked about today. But yeah, stay tuned for those, and we'll see you next time. Thanks everybody for joining. See y'all.